I think everybody's starting to kind of wander in and get settled, so we have a good evening in front of us, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Brian Irby. I'm from the Arkansas State Archives, and just want to say welcome to Podium. We have a good guest tonight, somebody that we're all familiar with, Mark Christ. I'll go ahead and give you his very short bio. As you can tell, it's a very short bio. So he was he is head of adult programming at the Central Arkansas Library System. He previously served as community outreach director for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, which he joined in 1990 after 8 years as a journalist, and we're glad that he ended up leaving journalism and coming to work in history, because he's provided so much to the history community as far as knowing a lot more about our past. So we're very glad that he did that. 1982, he graduated from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and he received his master's degree in 2000 from the University of Oklahoma. The Arkansas Historical Association presented him a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015, and the Civil War Trust awarded him the 2013 State Preservation Leadership Award. He's president of the Board of Trustees of the Arkansas Historical Association, a former member of the Arkansas Civil War Sesquicentennial Commission, and the Arkansas World War I Centennial Commemoration Committee, and former chairman of the Board of Directors of the Arkansas Humanities Council. When have you ever had time to sleep?
Squeeze it in.
Okay. He's written, edited, and co-edited several books, including Rugged and Sublime, The Civil War in Arkansas, Sentinels of History, Reflections on the Arkansas Properties Listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which won an award of merit from the American Association for State and Local History. Getting Used to Being Shot At, The Spence Family Civil War Letters, All Cut to Pieces and Gone to Hell, The Civil War, Race Relations, and the Battle of Poison Spring. The Earth Shook and Trees Trembled, The Civil War in Arkansas, 1863 to 64. Ready, Booted, and Spurred, The Civil War, Arkansas, 1863, The Battle for a State, which won the Military Order of the Stars and Bars 2010 Douglas Southwell Freeman Award, and the Central Arkansas Library System's 2013 Booker Worthen Literary Prize. This day we watched again a Union soldier's account of war in Arkansas and the Trans-Mississippi region. I do wish this cruel war was over. First person accounts of the Civil War, Arkansas, from the Arkansas Historical Quarterly. Competing Memories, The Legacy of Arkansas's Civil War, and A Confused and Confusing Affair, Arkansas and Reconstruction. He's also written many articles for such publications as the Civil War News, North and South, Blue and Gray, Arkansas Historical Quarterly, and Pulaski County Historical Review. The Pulaski County Historical Society awarded him its Peg Smith Mary Worthen Award for his article An Abolition Whole, Life in Union, Little Rock, 1863 and 1865. Tonight he's going to be talking about his book, This Day We Marched Again, Union Soldiers' Account of War in Arkansas and the Trans-Mississippi. Everybody welcome Mark Christ.
I asked him to edit that. Well, one of the high points of my career at the Historic Preservation Program was helping with the Civil War Sesquicentennial commemoration. We did that between 2007 and 2015. And perhaps the highlight of that was an email I got one day. Turned on the computer, and Saturday, August 21, 2010, a guy from Mike Wilson, who's athletic director at a school in Broomfield, Colorado, had sent me this email. It said, "I have been blessed with the possession of diaries of my great-great-grandfather, Jacob Haas, who fought as a young German-speaking immigrant in Company A, Ninth Regiment of the Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry. I have treasured these since I was a boy, and with the sesquicentennial of the war, I thought they may be of interest to share. If there is any interest in seeing and reading these items, please contact me. They are heirlooms in my family, and I believe historically important." So after I cleaned the drool from my chin, I responded to him that yes, I truly would like to see this diary. I called him and we visited, and he sent me a typescript translation. And I found one of the best first-person accounts of the war in the Trans-Mississippi. Haas and his comrades served in Kansas, the Indian Territory, Missouri, and Arkansas, and walked pretty much everywhere they went, hence the title of the book. Mike gave me permission to annotate Jacob's diary, which is now this book, and it is truly a great account. Jacob was a good observer of the places he marched through and the events he witnessed. He was sometimes funny, sometimes poetic, always interesting. Okay, Jacob Haas was born in 1840 in Württemberg, Germany. He emigrated to Wisconsin between 1850 and 1860, which is the first year he shows up in the census. When war came in 1860, Sheboygan County men answered the call. One Wisconsin history wrote that Lincoln's call to arms was answered by the German, the Scandinavian, the Irishman, and the native-born American without any distinction or hesitancy. Sheboygan County would provide 2,215 soldiers to Union service, and only 479 of them were drafted. The rest volunteered. Probably more than half of the eligible population of the county at that time. Haas enlisted on September 17, 1861 in the Sheboygan Tigers, which would become Company A of the Ninth Wisconsin Infantry Regiment under Colonel Frederick Salomon, whose brother would become governor of the state. And Salomon would have a very distinguished career here in Arkansas. Haas wrote of the early days in camp. "Days went by drearily, and some of the boys slipped by the guards and went into town. Some were caught, but not much was done in the way of punishment, except that they were put in the guardhouse. December and January came, and we were still camping in cold and deep snow on the shore of Lake Michigan in Camp Siegel in biting winds." I'm from northern Indiana, and I can attest that the winds were biting and very cold up there, and I wasn't in a tent. They left there on January 22, 1862, took a boat down the Mississippi, then a train across Missouri. These are some of the few times that Haas and his colleagues would have the luxury of conveyance. They went to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and then marched to Fort Scott, where he wrote, "At last, on the 8th day of our march, we came to Fort Scott. Just when we went up the hill into town, the wind blew so hard that we could hardly stand on our feet, and dust flew like smoke. It filled our eyes and noses. We could hardly see anything, hurried on best we could without looking about. On the south side of town, on an open place near a spring and creek, we rested and then made camp without delay, for a heavy thunderstorm came up. We had marched 140 miles. On May 16, they were ordered into the Indian Territory, the first federal invasion of what is now Oklahoma. And this campaign saw a lot of marching and not much action. A typical day, June 3, 1862. Today we crossed a 26-mile stretch of beautiful prairie. Many colored flowers cover the ground. It is beautiful, but even beauty in the long run becomes monotonous. Led by the regiment, the expedition was led by Colonel William Weir. He was a pre-Kansas lawyer and a notorious drunkard. He led them on a meandering and seemingly pointless march in which temperatures went over 100 degrees and there was very little water. July 8th, we marched and camp was made in a bleak hill near woods. The heat was intense and springs were dry. Only one spring could be found for the entire army, but even that was all red and really unfit to drink. Even then, too many thirsty crowded around it and it was almost impossible to get water. Many were glad to suck wet sand. So we ended up going on a bender in his tent, and on July 18, Frederick Salomon saying, quote, "His grossly intemperate habits, long continued, had produced idiocy or monomania, arrested Weir and took command and got them the heck back to Kansas." The Ninth Wisconsin was involved in the First Battle of Newtonia, Missouri in late fall of 1862. 4 companies of the Ninth were cut to pieces in this fight, but luckily Jacob and Company A were not part of that action. They came to Arkansas in mid-October under James Blunt. Here, Blunt is one of the prominent figures, especially in western Arkansas during the Civil War. They came in mid-October, and a typical day was on October 25. "This day we marched again." Nice title. "Fine apple orchards are around, but they have suffered by frost. Rocky hills and deep valleys make beautiful panorama. Our Company A was in advance. Soon intelligence came that our cavalry in the lead had been fired on from a mill. The perpetrators escaped, but the mill was stormed and burned." And indeed, guerrillas were a constant danger for the Union Army. On November 3rd, he wrote, "We proceeded about 4 miles from Bentonville and camped on a farm, Camp Bonnie it was called. A young artillery lieutenant of the 2nd Indiana was careless enough to get into a love affair with a young lady and was encouraged. He went to see her all alone, but carried his arms. One day the young lady took his sword and revolver. Upon signal of her mother and about a half-dozen guerrillas stormed into the home, caught the unarmed lieutenant, and took him out, tortured him in the most barbaric manner, and buried him under dry leaves where his comrades found him. When he did not return, his comrades, suspecting evil, investigated and found the corpse. The home of the girl with all the belongings were burned in retaliation. What became of the 2 women, I have never learned." The Ninth was not involved in the October 27 battle at Cane Hill, but during the December 7 battle at Prairie Grove, they guarded the Army's wagon train at Ray's Mill, and then came to the battlefield afterwards. Haas wrote, "On the battlefield stood a house in which women and children were in the cellar during the battle. The battle over, the woman came out and found her husband, brother, and brother-in-law among the dead. Her grief was terrible. She blamed only us for the war. Soon after, her house was burned with all that was in it. She had nothing left." Haas was part of the forced march from Prairie Grove to Van Buren at the end of December. Blunt and James Herron were not bashful about marching these guys. And he wrote if you've ever driven down through the Boston Mountains from Prairie Grove toward Fayetteville, it's a tough drive and a 4-wheel drive. So imagine walking that. Anyways, he wrote, "Roads became impassable, and we had to take the creek bed, going in cold and deep water." This is the end of December. 23 times we had gone through the water, and there seemed to be no end. Night came on, and we made camp on a small farm. The fence rail served for thousands of campfires. What a vision that was. Next day, the wading through the creek began again, knee-deep and later deeper. 13 times we have been in so far today. Now 2 rivers meet, and we have to go in again. It was deep. The current was so strong that we could barely keep on our feet. It was the last crossing, but it was the 37th time in 36 hours. So when the Army got to Van Buren, there was not a whole lot of fighting, but there was a bit of looting, which he was not bashful about admitting. Slowly we moved on, and by night came to town. Each took care of himself best he could. Next morning, a camp was chosen, and the town inspected. I had just gone into a large store. Many others were in, and plenty of sugar there. We took some. We saw General Blenn enter, gun in hand. The men fled. The general closed and locked the door. It was also one of the first times that he saw African Americans in slavery. He wrote, "A troop of Negroes was found locked up in a barn and anxiously peered at us through the cracks. They told us their masters had locked them up and told them to be very quiet. They were told the Yankees would kill them if they would find them. We set them at liberty, and for joy they jumped like crickets. Afterward, they went with us. Several thousand slaves followed the Union Army when it went back north." So for the next 6 months, General Herron led the Ninth Wisconsin and the rest of his Missouri division on an apparently aimless walk through the Ozark Mountains in southwest Missouri and northwest Arkansas. A lot of their travel was through extensively remote areas on almost non-existent road, as on March 23 of 1863. March 23rd, we proceeded and again crossed mountains, and twice we crossed the James River. Here the river was not deep at all, crossed on cavalry horses. Horses balked, objected to carrying two. One horse, 2 men on it, got into deep water and turned over, but all came out except one gun which remained in the river. The wilderness is little inhabited, only a recluse here and there. Kind of that way now in parts of there. It seemed to be almost apart from the world. After a march of about 14 miles, we came to a deep, rocky ravine with high walls around. Here was a house with many women in it. They were much frightened and at the same time surprised and interested over such company. They thought they could never be found and had never seen so many men together. He also, he and his comrades spent some time in Carrollton in Carroll County in March and April. He wrote, "We went forward over rolling country and came to Berryville, a very small town. We camped on an open field and went on next day and camped. It was so dense that sometimes you could hardly see 10 feet ahead. We camped near town on open field. After we had camped here for several days, at different times guns were fired from dense woods at some of our soldiers, and one was wounded. This caused great irritation among the men. Several companies of cavalry were sent out with orders to burn every house in the community. Orders were carried out quite promptly, and some of the suspected people were shot. April 6th, we left Carrollton, and much of the city was burned in reprisal of the deeds of bushwhackers." Well, on July 8, the regiment was dispatched to Rolla, Missouri, from which they would go to garrison duty in St. Louis. And they actually had the luxury of taking a train from Rolla to St. Louis, which must have been a great relief from them. But St. Louis was not the best place for post duty. That night brought much diversion because of the great multitude of unusually large rats. They were almost countless in number and so annoying that they ran over our feet. They were in every house and even upon the roofs. At night, on the sidewalks, they would run under your feet and squeak all around you. When on guard duty, we would throw wood and stones at them and even use bayonet. If you scared off one, 2 or half a dozen would be behind you or between your feet. It was aggravating and highly irritating. In September, they transferred to Arkansas. They took a boat to Helena and then to Devall's Bluff and marched to Little Rock. And they found that battle was not the only danger they would face in Arkansas. Soon we had our dinner on the fire, cooking promisingly. A strong wind was blowing. Some of us became concerned because of the dead trees hanging over us. But dinner was ready and we took it on our tents. Then came a crash, a cry. A great limb of a giant tree had crashed into a tent. The men jumped out, but the last one was struck and killed instantly. The blood ran over his face. Friedrich Rossmann was dead. Another man was scratched but not seriously hurt. The dead man was washed, coffin was made best we could, and next day the corpse was sent to Little Rock, where a brother was among the remaining soldiers. He was buried with soldiers' honors on the soldiers' cemetery. Then all our tents were moved from under the trees to an open place. And Friedrich Rossmann is buried in the Little Rock National Cemetery. I found his grave and visited on Memorial Day this year. So, Jacob Haas and the Ninth Wisconsin took part in the Camden Expedition in March and April of 1864, and fully a third of his manuscript deals with that campaign. It includes one of the best descriptions of a soldier's camp while in the field that I have seen. We entered Benton and went on down a hill to a clearing, and in the bordering tree made bivouac, for we had no tents. Necessity is the mother of wisdom. Rain has fallen, and it is raining still. 2 soldiers chummed together. Out came the pocket knife. We cut 2 forked sticks. For up we put them then to the ground, about 7 feet apart. Now a pole over the stick, and then 2 rolls of oilcloth over the pole, and the sides fastened to the ground. Now brush and leaves on the ground inside. That gives room in bed for 2. From the gable end we crawl in, lie down, and sleep. That is a soldier's bivouac. Then the water can flow beneath. If rain is very copious, then fence rails go below the brush and grass over the rails. Then the water can flow below. We go in and out on all four. In good weather, the oilcloth is put on the ground. We stretch out on it and cover with our woolen blanket. Then all is well. Over us is the great blue tent, and the stars are our candles. The Ninth Wisconsin was part of the 2nd Brigade of Major General Frederick Steele's 7th Army Corps. They were marching south to join a 2nd Union Army at Shreveport, Louisiana, and from where they would then invade Texas. Haas and his comrades are part of the escort for Steele's supply train and fought throughout the day on April 2, 1864, losing one man wounded and 11 missing before driving off the attackers. However, that day ended well for them. Here, close to our camp, near the house was a large pile of ashes. Some of our men did not trust that pile, inspected and found in it a barrel full of the finest ham. All was divided under the greatest merriment. The lady of the house came and gave a sharp tongue lashing to the keen-scented Yankees, who spy everything. Laughter and derision was all she received. Haas and the Ninth Wisconsin next saw a battle 2 days later at the crossing of the Little Missouri River at Elkins Ferry. He wrote, "When our men went to meet them, the rebels retired, and ours after them, until they perceived that the rebels fell back, only to have others of their forces cut them off. Then ours retired, and the rebels again attacked and drove them to the bank of the river. We now plainly heard heavy musket firing, mingles with the roar of cannon. By this time, the 29th Iowa had crossed the river to aid them, and now we and our battery went over in the midst of a rain of rebel bullets. Cannon now roared from both sides. When we followed the roar of the cannon, our brave General Rice met us and gave welcome in the words, 'We will send these traitors to hell before we leave this place.' But we were stunned when we saw blood run down both sides of his face and saw pain in his features. When we expressed our sympathy, he only said, 'It is a pity because of my cap, because it cost $5 and it is entirely torn.' A piece of shell had torn the cap and wounded him in the head. It came close to take his life. After the fighting at Elkins Ferry, there were several days of skirmishing on Prairie du Chien, which is one of the most gorgeous battlefields you will see in the state of Arkansas. And it's at modern-day Prescott. And Haas offered this description. "We came close to the timber on the opposite side of the prairie. Here halt was made, and the cannon began to growl. The rebels, too, began to throw their bombs and shells, but they did not seem to hit. One of our batteries pounded the rebels before and behind a home. Here we remained, lying in the grass until darkness fell upon us. Sharpshooters kept up the fire. From shelter, often sharp epithets were thrown across. The rebels offered us coffee, and we them sauerkraut, if they come and get it. Distance between us was not great. All we had to eat was half a ration of crackers. Fire was not allowed." On April 15th, Steele abandoned the march toward Shreveport, having heard that the Union Army in Louisiana had been turned back, which is a tale of woe that deserves its own telling. But Steele turned toward Camden on the Washita River and the prospect of food for his starving army. The 9th Wisconsin was part of his rear guard and fought off enemy pursuers at Poison Spring. This was on April 15th. Soon we came to Little Washington Road. Here we found many earmarks of nearness of rebel. We were just climbing up the hill when our howitzers again lifted up their voices. Soon the large cannon joined in the song. We were ordered into battle line and marched into brush behind the large cannons, which in great haste spat shells against the rebels. We marched upward, enemy shells shrieking and exploded around us. Dirt rained upon us, mingled with steel and howling sounds in the air. We tried to protect ourselves behind trees and in any way possible. From here we could see the work of our artillery, how they hurried in loading, firing, and resetting their guns. Shells shrieked and exploded between us and our artillery, throwing up dirt into the air, and others tore down trees. It was a spectacle of hell let loose. The Union Army was very hungry. They'd left Little Rock on half rations and had eaten up pretty much all of them during the course of the campaign. And they got increasingly desperate once in Camden. Haas was part of one of many foraging expeditions that was sent out from Camden looking for anything to eat for man or beast. He wrote, "At 11 o'clock, we and Company B were ordered across the river after provisions. After a march of about 8 miles, we came to a large farm. With the aid of Negroes, we found bacon and ham, plenty of it hidden under cotton, plus molasses and lard. The garden lost onions, and the hennery its chickens. The slaves greeted us with joy. We were the first Yankees they saw. We departed in peace." Food remained scarce, and after 2 Union supply trains were lost and their escorts destroyed at Poison Spring and Marks Mills, Steele elected to cut his losses and head back to Little Rock while he still had an army to save. The pursuing Confederates caught up with the Union forces in the Saline River bottoms on the evening of April 29. Conditions were rough. "We heard a few cannon shots, but marched on toward the River Saline. The river was deep, and the pontoon bridges had to be built. The entire night they had heavy rain and thunderstorms. Roads were terrible, and we had to stop in the morass. Boom, boom, suddenly the cannon barked behind us. Fear and trembling was upon the faces of the white people, and more so upon the faces of the slaves who fled with us. We were in the morass, and the enemy upon us. We muddled on until we were in the deepest mud and water and close to the swollen Saline River. We made bivouac on a small farm. With darkness, the cannonade ceased. We had to wait until, under great difficulty, the pioneers made a bridge across the river. Then our large train, artillery, and all that could walk and crawl crossed the river. Rain had been and was still pouring continuously. We had slept lying on fence rails. We had nothing to eat and had marched 21 miles. On April 30, 1864, Jacob Haas and the Ninth Wisconsin fought their greatest battle, protecting Steele's armies across the Saline River at Jenkins Ferry. Here's just a part of the action he describes. The 29th Iowa Regiment had gone into the timber and was firing. By this time, bullets whizzed around us. Our entire brigade was soon in line and under increasing fire. The rebels came closer. Now they were in strong numbers on the small clearing and came closer every second. The rolling of the guns sounded like a continuous thunderstorm, continual hissing and shrieking of thousands of bullets. The 29th Iowa began to waver and retreat before the superior power of the rebels. Then appeared our General Rice and ordered us into the fray. With zest and hurrah, guns in hand, we broke through the other regiment to meet the rebels in the open field. Terrible was the gunfire as we turned upon the surprised rebel. They had not expected. They were sure of victory. Now they ran under terrible losses. Our bullets trimmed their lines and the rest fled in confusion. When they had been repulsed, we were ordered back into the edge of the woods. Well, the rebels were repulsed, and the army crossed the river, destroying the pontoon bridges behind them. They then marched 2 days with no food whatsoever. Then on May 2nd, Haas wrote, "It was nearly night when suddenly a rush came into camp. All the lame and discouraged ran in one direction as if they were new men. Hurrah, crackers! Plenty crackers! Now we get hurrah!" It came from all directions. Several loads of crackers had arrived from Little Rock. In greatest hurry, they were unloaded and distributed. Joy everywhere, and then sweet sleep. May 3rd. This morning, all formed orderly. Our company ahead. Then came a company of Negroes with the captured cannon and flags. Then came the 1st Brigade, and so the entire army. Soon we came to a little hill from which we can overlook the city, Little Rock. Here we waited until all had arrived, and then between thousands of happy faces with music, we marched into the city and entered our well-known camp of tent houses. Now we could eat and drink and then rested from the great 276-mile expedition. Well, Haas survived the Camden Expedition, but the greatest enemy of the Civil War soldier, disease, caught up with him in August of 1864. He wrote, "Sickness is beginning to encroach into our regiment and even into the entire army. So it is called scorbut, scurvy. The symptoms are red, blue, and even green blotches on the body, and most of the lower limbs and the gums. On some, the legs are swollen and blue, green, and black. The gums turning black and sponge-like. Under least pressure, blood oozes out, and the gums fall off as if rotten. Many unfit for service and must be sent home." Haas was among them, and he saw something remarkable on the boat on the way back to Wisconsin. He wrote, A while after we were on board, rumor came that 2 women were among the soldiers, dressed as men. Everybody went to deck to see them. I too was keenly interested and went. There in the midst of a group of soldiers sat a very young and beautiful soldier, who in manner, voice, and carriage had nothing of the man soldier, and now was discovered as not belonging there. Upon inquiry, she stated that she had served 18 months as a soldier. She received rich presents from soldiers and civil travelers. Her hair shorn short, and in soldier's uniform and assuming rough manners, she had not been detected. Now let us look at the other one at the rear of the ship. She was telling fortunes from cards. She was rather old for a soldier and had too much bust for a man and could not hide it. The fine lines of the face were a telltale, nor could she hide it in her voice. She had served 2 years in a cavalry regiment and had been wounded in one hand. Next came time for battle. She refused to go in and revealed her identity. She was dismissed from service, was brought to the boat under escort to be sent home to Missouri. The escort gave away the secret. The first one was very much minded to re-enlist. Well, Jacob Haas returned to civilian life, worked as a carpenter. He married Annabelle Goring in 1865. She would die from complications of childbirth on February 27, 1873, and their infant daughter died 1 week later. Jacob married Johanna Setti, who we see here, 5 months later, and would raise 4 daughters and a son, settling in Corder, Missouri, in the heart of the country where Jacob had campaigned 20 years earlier. The old soldier suffered from the effects of scurvy, and the years of marching and camping under the stars left him with crippling rheumatism. He died on September 12, 1906, proud of his service for his adopted country, and leaving behind a remarkable memoir of one soldier's experiences in the Trans-Mississippi. Thank you. I can take questions? Oh, okay.
Are we taking questions?
Absolutely.
He was born in Germany. I figured in my head when you said that he was born in Germany and was very young, right?
Yes.
At the time of the Civil War.
Yes.
So
Yeah, he was 21 when he enlisted.
So had he learned English, or did he write that diary in German?
The diary was written in German. It was his son-in-law transcribed it. And one of the cool things about it, his son-in-law was also of German descent. And you know, when you read it, you get the cadence of the writing is it's very foreign, and it's just one of the cool things about it.
Yeah. Thank you.
He did speak English, right?
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure how well he spoke English during the time of the war, but he could get along.
Did he have any kind of formal education? Because the way he wrote is very descriptive, eloquent almost.
Yeah, I didn't. I could not find anything about his education or anything. But I mean, obviously he could write, and in fact, very poetically. So, yes, James.
Is there evidence that he took notes or wrote while he was on campaign? Or is this after memory?
He wrote while campaigning, and then transcribed it, I think, into this illuminated diary that passed down through the years. So there's a pretty good chance that he was able to correct some of the, or add to some of the stuff he did while campaigning. But the visceral part of it, I think, came, that he wrote that down. That was his raw experiences in the field. Yes.
Does he comment at all on Unionist or anti-Confederate sentiment in Arkansas?
That's a good question. I don't think he runs into a whole lot of Unionists. Yeah, and it might be because they didn't want to be around Germans, to be frank.